So the forks are off and I'm working on them kind of on the side. Now I'm going to try and get the steering stem and column apart and take off the triple clamps here. So I've already taken off this pinch bolt. This pinch bolt goes right back here, and it's just a bolt with a lock washer and then that finished nut right there. And I've buffed the chrome up on this one, so and put him aside. He's ready to go. This is just a 19 millimeter bolt that goes down through the neck, and then there's a, I guess you could call it a washer. It looks more of like a finish piece. It's kind of beveled, chromed out, kind of nice and clean there. Now, in theory, this piece here, this top piece, should come up off of that column. So I'm going to have to get a hammer and a block and put a little persuasion behind that, and then there's going to be this cinch nut, this nut down here. It's got a bunch of notches in it, and it generally requires a special tool to loosen that, but I don't have one of those tools, so I'm going to see what I've got to make that work when I get to that point. So the next thing I'm going to do is take off this top. First thing I'm going to try is just a rubber mallet, and when that pinch bolt's in there, it squeezes this down across that neck, and sometimes when you remove that bolt, it actually doesn't spread out. So feel free to just take a large screwdriver and just kind of gently drive it in there, and you can actually feel that this is coming off already. So it really doesn't take a whole lot of effort if you approach it right. Just be patient. I'm just going to wiggle it a little bit, pull that off. So there we go. There's the top portion, and because this doesn't really this isn't really supposed to turn or anything, so this doesn't need to be perfectly smooth. And I'm just going to look in there. It actually looks pretty clean. No real rust. You can see some really tiny grooves in here, and they go all the way around, and they're machined in there, and that allows for a little bit of friction on this stem. So I'm getting ready to take this nut off here, and I've turned the stem all the way so that it's hitting against the frame and it won't turn anymore. Then I'm going to take my tool, and I'm sure all of the self-proclaimed mechanics out there will pitch a fit, but I'm going to take this wrench here, and this nut shouldn't be super tight, and I'm actually getting it to turn right there, and I didn't even bite into it or anything, so that worked out well. Maybe it was just a little bit too loose. So this now should just twist. You've got a cap under here that's separate from the nut. And as I take this off, I'm just going to keep an eye on the nut just to see if it is directional. Whoa! And there we go. Now, that was a problem, and that was my bad. These old bearings are actual ball bearings like this, and these just went all over my garage floor, so I get to go chase them down. Don't do that. Hold on to that stem. I really wasn't expecting it to fall out like that, but mistakes like that happen. Anyways, it's out. Okay, so after the bottom literally fell out of this, I have the top nut, and then there's a cap under here, and that is followed by a big flat washer, and right underneath this flat washer, well, it's not completely flat, but there are the top bearings, and as I'm lifting this out, I'm losing some of them because they're sticking to the old grease and in this channel here. So I've got to make sure that I collect all of those. Alright, I think I've found all of these that dropped onto the ground. I'll know in a second here. They should have enough to go all the way around this top part here. I'm not used to these types of bearings, so this is quite the experience. So near as I can tell, I've either lost a bearing or I'm missing a bearing from this top, and it just as easily could have disappeared some time ago, and they may have just put it back together without it, because I'm pretty sure I picked all of them up off the ground. So, short story, I'm going to replace all of these bearing components with some up-to-date components before and then I'm not even going to deal with these, putting them back together. I think that's kind of a lost cause. So I just removed the race that sits in the frame, and basically what I did was I took a screwdriver, got this long screwdriver with kind of a beat up, rounded off tip. This thing works really well for this. But I came up from the bottom and just went around the circumference of that race, just tapping on it and driving it up and out of there. So I'm going to do the same for the bottom. The bottom is like this, it's just a little bit larger, takes a larger bearing than the top. So when I put this down in here, I'm just catching the edge of that race, and the screwdriver is just a little bit short, but I'm just going to drive it around. Just try and catch the edge of that. Actually, I'm going to have to get a different screwdriver. Okay, so I'm back with an even bigger screwdriver. This one I can get in through here and hit the edge of that race. So there's not a lot of clearance there, so it's a little bit tough to get that edge. But once I feel like I've got a pretty good contact there, I'm just going to give it a little tap, and I'm going to work my way around this. There we go. There we go. That's it. That's going to be replaced with the new bearing set as well. So as long as if you're driving on this and you're hitting the non-bearing side, the non-contact side, you don't have to worry too much about marring it up. But certainly if you're replacing this race, go ahead and do what you got to do to get it out. So as I'm cleaning off this race, I'm just kind of looking for some signs of wear and tear, and there's a lot of stuff that may seem pretty minor, but it ultimately affects your bearing. This race has got some surface rust, it's got some pitting here, it's got some indentations from the ball bearings, so all of those are pretty good indicators that that race needs to be replaced anyway. So even if I had all of the ball bearings and they were all perfectly round, and which they wouldn't be, probably because of this, the whole system kind of needs to be replaced. So every time I dig into this further and further, it just justifies the decision that I'm going to make to ultimately replace the races and the bearings on this steering column. So to get this old race off, I'm just using some real gentle persuasion here. Since I know I'm going to be replacing the race, I'm not too concerned about marring it up, but I don't want to mar up the triple clamp or the steering column. And it seems to be moving pretty freely. I'm just going to slowly go around, and you want to hit this equally from all sides. And on this side, if you've got a big enough screwdriver, you can just place it in there and pry it, and it'll gradually, that race will come off of there. Once you get it started, it seems to go pretty quick. It's just that initial breaking it free from where it's been sitting. You can see the gap there. That's widening up. So I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. I'm not necessarily going to stick my screwdriver down in there until I get a little bit further. Because again, those are bearing surfaces and race surfaces, and I don't want to junk them up. This out here is just really cosmetic. Now that I think I've got it pretty much the whole way, there's very little resistance, then I can go ahead and get in there and just give it some light twists. Okay, so as we pull that off, you can see the surface that the race sits down on, and this is the race. And again, maybe a little bit hard to see, but all of this stuff right here, that's pitting, and that's not good for bearings. So this is going to be replaced along with the bearings. And then this column here looks pretty good. There's some real minor surface rust on there, which in and of itself is not a big deal because nothing actually rides on that surface there.